Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of the most bizarre corners of medieval medicine, where the bedroom becomes a battlefield and passion is practically a prescription for death. Welcome to a time when doctors genuinely believed sex could kill you. Not metaphorically, like heart stopped, soul vacuumed out your nostrils, call a priest serious. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Seriously, don't force it. This isn't a medieval confession booth. Also, drop your city and what time it is in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're watching from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin in a world with no antibiotics, no working plumbing, and no concept of germs. The year is somewhere in the 1100s, maybe a little earlier, maybe a little later. It doesn't really matter. Most of what passes for science is a game of ancient telephone involving Aristotle, Galen, and an enthusiastic monk who once sneezed near a candle and called it a divine revelation. You're lying on a straw-stuffed mattress, your back aches, your head feels hot, and last night, you had a lusty dream involving someone whose name you probably shouldn't say out loud. You've just committed a cardinal sin in your sleep. Worse yet, the local physician, who might also be your cousin's priest, says this sort of bodily eruption is a drain on your vital essence. He leans in and sniffs. Apparently, even air around you smells sinful. Welcome to the medieval worldview, where body and soul are hopelessly entangled, and any wrong twitch might be your last. The doctor doesn't exactly have a diploma, but he's read parts of Physica by Hildegard of Bingen and maybe half a scroll by Hippocrates. That's enough. He opens his medicine bag, containing leeches, a suspiciously hairy salve, a dead frog, and a tiny jar of someone's urine, possibly yours. He announces solemnly that you're suffering from vapors of the lower nature, which is not only vague, but deeply insulting. You try to protest, but he's already whispering about hot blood, unbalanced humors, and how your recent eruption may have weakened your heart and loosened your bowels. Honestly, you're not sure what he means, but sounds bad. Back then, doctors leaned hard on humoral medicine, which is like astrology for body fluids. Everything about your health, physical, mental, emotional, was thought to depend on the balance of four substances: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too much blood, you're overheated and lustful. Too much phlegm, sluggish, and probably boring at parties. Everything had to stay in delicate equilibrium, or else. And sex? That was the earthquake shaking your inner fluids out of whack. If you were a man, releasing your essence was believed to expel precious vital heat. The ancients, especially Galen, thought semen was essentially concentrated blood, your life force cooked to perfection in your inner furnace. Lose too much, and you became cold, feeble, and possibly infertile, like spending your body's rent money on fireworks. If you were a woman, things were even weirder. Female pleasure was considered both medically necessary and spiritually dangerous. A good climax supposedly helped with fertility, so it was sometimes recommended by midwives. But too much could unbalance your humors or send your womb wandering. That's not a euphemism. They genuinely believed the uterus could detach and float around your body like a confused jellyfish, smothering your lungs, or rattling your brain. This wasn't fringe thinking. It was textbook material, copied, memorized, and passed down in Latin under flickering candlelight. Your average educated medieval doctor could recite it from memory, often while diagnosing a patient with something like melancholia caused by damp air and lustful thoughts. Let's be honest, sex was a terrifying, misunderstood mystery to most people back then. It was a private act with public consequences, a source of pleasure wrapped in shame and silence. Combine that with the church's belief that original sin started in a naked garden with forbidden fruit, and you get a culture riddled with anxiety over bodily urges. Quirkier still, many doctors believe celibacy gave you superpowers. Monks and hermits who abstained were thought to live longer, think clearer, and even smell better. Meanwhile, someone who engaged in frequent carnal activities was basically walking toward an early grave, reeking of sulfur and regret. There's a record of a French bishop who advised knights to abstain before battle, not for discipline or purity, but because sex would make their knees weak and their souls slow. If that sounds like your mom telling you to save your energy before a big exam, you're not wrong. Just imagine it delivered by someone in a mitre and a fur-lined robe. This wasn't just superstition, it was deeply baked into medicine. Some treatises included charts mapping out safe days to have sex based on the moon's position and whether you'd eaten eels recently. Some warned of fatal consequences if you did it on a Thursday or while facing east. One 13th century manual described the death rattle of the loins, which might be the worst bedroom phrase ever coined. Yet, despite the absurdity, there was something almost sweet in how hard they tried to understand things. With no microscopes, no biology textbooks, and definitely no sex ed, they leaned on philosophy, astrology, and pure guesswork. In their eyes, your body was a fragile container for your soul. Every fluid, every breath, a message from the divine. Of course, that didn't make it any less terrifying, especially if you were the poor soul who just woke up sticky, guilty, and one humor short of a funeral. You wake up the next morning with a slight headache and a full dose of medieval dread. The doctor, or is he a monk? It's hard to tell, has left behind a small cloth bag filled with herbs, which he insists you must boil and inhale 3 times a day. Supposedly, it will rebalance your humors and cool the blood, which sound helpful until you realize he never explained how much blood you're supposed to have in the first place. Also, it smells like damp moss mixed with goat feet. At the heart of your treatment lies the 4 humors. Every ache, itch, and inappropriate dream is attributed to a blend of bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each carries its own personality, elemental identity, and temperament. If you're hot and bothered, it's too much blood. If you're sluggish and emotional, you've got excess phlegm. Everything from your mood to your favorite food is dictated by this slimy cocktail sloshing inside you. Post-eruption, your blood is obviously in a frenzy. The theory goes back to ancient Greece, from thinkers like Hippocrates and Galen, whose writings medieval doctors treated like sacred scripture. You'd think someone might have said, hey, maybe we should double-check this bile thing. But no, these texts were copied by hand, stored in monasteries, and taught in universities for generations. Back then, a university meant a cold stone hall filled with men in robes shouting about the spleen. According to humoral theory, your body's health depends on balance. Too much or too little of any humor throws everything off: your organs, your thoughts, even your libido. And sex was one of the fastest ways to tip that scale violently. For men, the male body naturally runs hotter, full of blood, fire, and tension. Semen was distilled blood, a thick white paste of pure life force. Every release drained your body's most essential reserve. According to physician Constantine the African, excessive sex could cause fainting, loss of vision, and death, in that order. So, you're not just risking exhaustion, you're playing chicken with the Grim Reaper. For women, things were equally unscientific and even more insulting. While male bodies were seen as closed systems, female bodies were thought to be leaky, not just in obvious ways like menstruation, which was proof of inherent instability, but in their general nature. Women were colder, wetter, more emotionally erratic, and more susceptible to having their organs move around when aroused or disturbed. The uterus was the main offender. The wandering womb wasn't a metaphor. They believed it could literally detach and float inside a woman's body, bumping into vital organs, causing hysteria, choking, or seizures. Sometimes, they tried to lure it back into place using sweet-smelling herbs near the pelvis and bad-smelling substances near the mouth or nose, like coaxing a lost puppy with treats. This wasn't fringe, it was mainstream gynecology for centuries. Most medieval physicians were men, and most midwives, who actually saw female anatomy up close, weren't allowed to publish medical theories. So, everything about women's health was filtered through secondhand accounts and creative imagination, landing somewhere between poetry and nonsense. Yet, despite how bizarre it sounds, the humors gave people a sense of control. If you got sick, there was a reason. If you couldn't stop thinking about your neighbor's shirtless son in the grain fields, maybe it was just too much heat in your blood. Maybe you needed to eat cold grapes and avoid red meat. Maybe you needed a priest to draw a demon in your urine. Who's to say? Quirky detail. Medieval physicians believed your humors could affect your sexual urges, and sex could change your entire personality. A man with too much intimacy might become overly sentimental or irrational, losing his masculine heat. A woman with too little sex might become melancholic and rebellious, her blood thickening and bile darkening. The more unbalanced your love life, the closer you moved toward emotional chaos or demonic possession. There were even dietary rules. Spicy foods, garlic, onions, and wine were thought to increase desire by heating the blood, while cold, moist foods like cucumbers or milk reduced lust. You could theoretically turn someone into a celibate monk with enough oatmeal and pears. That was considered real strategy. Scholars still debate how seriously these beliefs were taken. Some argued doctors played up the humors for authority. Only a trained physician could interpret your sweat as a sign of excessive black bile. Others believed people genuinely feared dying from an enthusiastic night in the hay. It's probably a mix of both. Publicly, the theory was law. Privately, people likely rolled their eyes and did what they wanted, maybe with a clove of garlic under the pillow for good measure. Even now, remnants of the four humors echo in how we talk about moods: being hot-headed, cold-hearted, feeling blue, or bilious. These are linguistic fossils of a time when your body was a battlefield, and sex was practically Russian roulette with your soul. So here you are, wrapped in a scratchy wool blanket, sipping what tastes like boiled celery root, wondering how a single act, sex, became so medically dramatic. The doctor told you that if you keep draining your essence, your blood will overheat, your spirit will grow thin, and your mind might melt. It sounds extreme, but in medieval medicine, it's standard. They didn't see sex as an emotional connection or reproductive act. It was like popping open your body and letting life energy pour out, uncontrolled and chaotic. At the center of this worry was a gripping fear of heat, not fever or sunburn, but deep internal fire, living in your liver, heart, and loins. A healthy body was warm, but not too warm, just enough fire to keep your organs lively without burning them out. Sex entered the danger zone because it wasn't just about releasing fluids. It was about igniting your furnace and risking an internal blaze. Every act of passion stoked that fire, potentially overheating your blood and cooking your organs. If you were already sick, tired, or melancholic from cloudy weather, that extra jolt of bodily heat could finish you off, like tossing a log onto a fire licking the rafters. Learned men, mostly bearded, celibate, and smug, wrote detailed warnings about postcoital fevers, weakened hearts, and even instant death. One tale described a monk who broke his vows for a night of passion and was found the next morning stiff and steaming, his soul presumably sucked out by divine wrath or an overheated spleen. Anatomical knowledge was sketchy. Dissection was frowned upon, especially for women's bodies. So natural responses like a racing pulse or flushed cheeks were seen as signs of the body spiraling into crisis, organs swelling, blood bubbling, humors colliding in an invisible war beneath your skin. Some texts claimed the lungs shriveled with each orgasm, and a burning chest sensation signaled you'd exhaled too much vital force. Imagine being told your next breath could be your last because your body got too excited. This obsession with internal fire tied to the idea of moderation. Too much sleep, food, or sex was suicidal. Everything had to be rationed like a spiritual diet. One 12th century guide advised men to abstain from sex if they had heavy limbs, a pounding heart, a thin voice, or dreams of horses. Yes, horses, apparently. Dreaming of galloping stallions was your humors galloping off in the wrong direction. The church shaped these fears, taking a dim view of bodily pleasure. Sex was tolerated in marriage for reproduction, but anything beyond, especially if it involved laughter or enjoyment, was morally and physically corrupting. Even marital sex was expected to be brief, serious, and silent. Try explaining that to a modern couple with scented candles and a Spotify playlist. Some medical writers argued sex could be healthy in moderation, like conceiving a child on a Wednesday afternoon when the moon was waning, but only if both partners were healthy, had eaten cooling foods like lentils or lettuce, and avoided spicy foods for a week. Clinical romance. These ideas weren't from fringe quacks. They were published, debated, and taught in universities like Paris or Salerno, alongside geometry and theology. One day you're reciting Aristotle. The next, you're memorizing fruits that prevent nocturnal emissions. Historians still argue how much the average person believed this. Did the local cobbler fear dying from an afternoon delight, or did he ignore the rules and hope the priest didn't find out? These medical theories gave people a flawed, absurd, but oddly comforting map for navigating their bodies. So you sit there staring into your mug of lukewarm sage tea, wondering if your last indulgence scorched your lungs. You feel okay, maybe a little tired, maybe your heart feels warmer, but that could just be embarrassment. Or maybe you've lost a few ounces of vital force, and tomorrow you'll wake up unable to remember your name. Or maybe this whole thing about heat and madness was cooked up by people who had no idea how it worked, but were great at making it sound terrifying. The next time your village healer visits, he brings a scroll with diagrams that look like turnips wearing wigs. He points to one, taps his crooked fingernail, and explains it's a detailed rendering of the female reproductive system. You try not to laugh. It looks like a squid or a turkey leg, depending on the angle. He's dead serious, though. This is how medical authorities understood women's bodies for centuries. Abstract shapes drawn by people who'd never seen the real thing and weren't allowed to. It's time to talk about the so-called science of the wandering womb. Medieval medicine leaned hard into metaphor. The body was a clock, a garden, a stew pot. For women, the uterus was a creature unto itself, alive, hungry, and moody. The ancient Greeks started this idea, and medieval thinkers carry it forward. The womb wasn't just a passive baby holder. It was an active participant in a woman's health, emotions, and behavior. If it didn't get sexual release or pregnancy, it would wander upward, banging into organs, causing fainting, shortness of breath, anxiety, or fits of madness. In men, collapse might be blamed on overexertion or sin. In women, it was nearly always the fault of that rebellious floating womb. The condition was called hysteria, from the Greek hyster meaning uterus, a catch-all for everything from anxiety to seizures to being upset about unchurned butter. Doctors believed the cure was to anchor the womb with pregnancy, sedate it with herbs, or frighten it back into place. They'd hold bad smells like burning hair or sulfur to a woman's face to repel the womb downward, while placing pleasant smells, flowers, perfumes, or warm oil near the pelvis to lure it back, like tricking a cat from under the bed. This was legitimate practice, with entire chapters in medical handbooks devoted to womb management. Male doctors, many of whom had never seen a naked woman, claimed expertise in the uterus's complex moods. They warned against women remaining virgins too long, as it would make the womb restless, but also against too much sex, which could cause overstimulation and dangerous heat. The message: women's bodies were unpredictable, chaotic, and tied to their reproductive use. Female pleasure was a confusing, suspicious subject for medieval medicine. Some medieval texts acknowledged the concept of the wandering womb, while others denied it entirely. Influential physician Galen believed women needed to enjoy sex to conceive, leading some doctors to encourage marital intimacy as medical therapy, strictly within marriage and aimed at procreation. This gave female sexuality a dual status, required yet feared, honored yet condemned. Bizarrely, devices were invented to diagnose or treat the wandering womb. In one 14th century account, a physician crafted a leather mask infused with vinegar and dung to deter the womb from rising, resembling a medieval gas mask crossed with an unpleasant scented candle. It didn't work, but the effort was notable. These ideas weren't mere village superstitions. They were embraced at the highest intellectual levels. Scholars at the University of Bologna, one of Europe's earliest medical schools, debated uterine motion like an abstract math problem, disconnected from reality. Women were excluded from these discussions. However, some midwives in southern France and northern Italy quietly challenged these theories, observing that wombs didn't wander. Their insights were rarely recorded, often attributed to male scholars without credit. Modern historians debate how widespread belief in the wandering womb was. Some argue it was academic, not widely applied by local healers, while others see it as deeply embedded in cultural views of femininity, justifying medical neglect and legal restrictions. A woman's supposedly unstable body was used to dismiss her autonomy in decisions like owning land or speaking in court. Labels like hysteria were applied to outspoken women, those uninterested in marriage, or those enjoying sex too much, sometimes even equating to witchcraft. This medical theory enabled control over women's bodies. Sex was a tightrope. Too little intimacy might cause wombs to wander, too much might melt a woman's insides. Pleasure could lead to madness, denial to death, all deemed logical by medieval minds. In this context, living in fear of one's own body was common, with organs seemingly capable of going rogue. At the village chapel, the air thick with incense and judgment, the church's control over bodies and desires was palpable. Christianity wasn't just a religion. It was the culture's operating system, dictating education, law, medicine, and morality. Sex was tightly regulated, rooted in the church's interpretation of Adam and Eve's sin, often seen as sexual. This framed bodily urges as weaknesses. The church permitted sex only within marriage, for procreation, with enjoyment requiring guilt. Medieval doctors, often trained in church-run schools, echoed this, treating sex like a dangerous flame, necessary but risky. Celibacy was the ideal, with monks and nuns expected to renounce sexual thoughts entirely, leading to extreme measures like self-flagellation for impure dreams. Medical texts warned that lust could cause physical and spiritual ailments, from bloodshot eyes to demonic influence. Women were seen as especially vulnerable, their moist bodies making them both temptresses and victims. Some texts claimed women were more lustful yet less capable of control, doubling their perceived danger. Treatments for uterine fury included confession, fasting, or punishment. Men faced similar scrutiny. Monks' wet dreams were medical and moral crises, with remedies like sleeping on hard surfaces or avoiding meat. Masturbation, this solitary sin, was deemed catastrophic, potentially causing blindness or death. This church-doctor alliance shaped self-perception. Desires were diagnostic of spiritual health. Ordinary people's responses varied. Some lived in fear, others likely ignored the rules in private. The church's campaign turned natural instincts into threats, leaving people questioning if the fear was about health or control. Sleep was no refuge. Men feared nocturnal emissions, seen as life-draining losses of vital fluid. Semen was considered a finite resource, each loss shortening life. Erotic dreams were moral and spiritual emergencies, sometimes blamed on demons like Succubi, believed to steal semen for diabolical purposes. Monks took extreme measures, cold baths, iron underwear, even nettles, to prevent nocturnal pollution. Confession manuals listed such emissions as sins requiring penance. A 13th-century monk's frequent dreams led to exorcism and isolation, blamed on a succubus. Women's nocturnal arousal, though less visible, was also suspect, seen as uterine dreams or demonic influence. A few physicians, influenced by Arabic texts, saw such dreams as natural regulation, but the dominant view was fear-driven. People lived in terror of their unconscious, trying everything from fasting to relics to avoid sinful dreams. Sleep became a battleground, with monasteries treating emissions as spiritual collapses requiring confession or penance. Dream diaries served as evidence logs, with specific symbols like snakes or fire signaling temptation or damnation. The fear of succubi and incubi was widespread, with demons believed to exploit spiritual weakness. Parents, widows, and even kings took precautions against dream-induced sin. In this world, bedtime was fraught with danger, from wandering wombs to demonic seduction. Natural instincts were medical, moral, and spiritual minefields, leaving people to navigate a culture where their bodies and dreams could betray them at any moment. Some medieval texts claimed that a woman's sexual pleasure in dreams signaled a misaligned womb or infiltration by evil spirits. A German medical text warned that recurring lustful dreams could lead to despair, disorder, and unholy cravings unless treated with bitter herbs and solitude. However, not all advice was harsh. A few physicians, often influenced by Arabic medicine and scholars like Avicenna, suggested nocturnal emissions were a natural release, like an emotional sneeze, preventing illness from pent-up desires. This was a minority view, overshadowed by monks who saw every wet sheet as a summons from Satan. Temptation stories, a genre of monastic literature, detailed struggles with lustful dreams, some heartfelt, others unintentionally comical. One monk described torment by visions of a milkmaid with thighs like alabaster columns and a voice like King David's harp, resorting to eating cold peas and sleeping in a freezing hallway to cope. For an ordinary medieval woman, not a nun or noblewoman, desire was a perilous issue. Female sexuality terrified men, who mythologized it as dangerous and barely human. Galen's theory, widely cited, held that both men and women produced seed during sex, requiring mutual climax for conception. This seemed progressive but had a dark side. Excessive female pleasure could overstimulate the womb, causing hysteria, hallucinations, or seizures. A woman's moist body was seen as an unpredictable battlefield, and her interest in sex could lead to accusations of promiscuity or witchcraft. The Church viewed female lust as a double sin, desire itself and tempting others, casting Eve's shadow over every choice. A woman too eager during certain moon phases was said to drain men's strength or transfer madness through intercourse. One text described a man losing his senses after bedding a woman with too strong desire. Conversely, a woman who didn't enjoy sex was blamed for infertility, treated with uncomfortable oils, incense, or abdominal pressing during intercourse, often with strict instructions for positions and prayers. Female healers and midwives, with practical experience, sometimes challenged these ideas, but their knowledge was rarely recorded, often co-opted by male physicians. In Southern Europe, influenced by Arabic medicine, some physicians saw female libido as natural, even necessary for mental health. A Spanish physician warned that repressing desire could cause uterine choking and sorrow. In Northern Europe, however, suspicion prevailed. A 14th-century French woman faced witchcraft accusations after her husband claimed she enticed him too often, leaving him drained. The physician declared his seed overdrawn, and she was flogged and banned from marital relations for a year. Medical drawings reflected this paranoia, depicting women's genitals as gates of temptation or devil's passages with little accuracy. For women, expressing desire was fraught. Too much made you a threat, too little made you defective. Silence was safest, yet women shared advice, brewed calming teas, and preserved desire in quiet moments. Despite the oppressive science and theology, pleasure persisted. A fever changes everything. Not just a mild one, but one that aches and clouds your thoughts. Normally, it passes with rest and willow bark, but this time the doctor is coming. Intimacy during illness was considered suicidal in medieval medicine. Sex was seen as a thunderstorm in the body, stirring blood, exhausting lungs, and draining vital essence. For a sick person, it was a death sentence. Some claimed it caused spontaneous expiration, others that it prolonged fevers or softened organs. Women faced warnings that intercourse while feverish could cause sterility or psychological disturbance, with even arousing thoughts deemed dangerous. Real cases reinforced these fears. A nobleman died after sex during illness, his wife blamed for drawing his final breath. The church amplified this, teaching that sex during illness risked damnation. A rare exception allowed intercourse for illnesses caused by sexual frustration, but only under strict conditions, like consuming calming herbs and praying. The fear of postcoital collapse was widespread. Sex was believed to deplete vital forces, especially in men, whose semen was seen as distilled soul essence. Losing it too quickly, particularly when ill or old, invited death. Stories abounded. A nobleman dying after bedding his bride, a soldier collapsing post-crusade, a bishop found half-dressed. Medical texts warned that sex quickened the pulse and overheated the heart, comparing it to a tidal wave of lust. Women were blamed for emotional collapse or too much heat if their husbands died during sex, sometimes deemed spiritually toxic. Love shock from sudden passion was another risk, with manuals advising restraint and pauses for reflection. Medieval sex schedules added further complexity. Sex was forbidden on Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays due to religious significance, and risky on Saturdays or Mondays in some regions. Astrology mattered. Moon phases in Virgo or Capricorn were too dry, while Scorpio or Aries heightened lustful risks. Saints' days, Lent, Advent, and pre-communion periods banned sex, blocking nearly a third of the year. The ideal time was Thursday evening, 2 hours after sundown, during a waxing moon, after a light meal of lentils and spinach. Thunderstorms were dangerous, believed to disrupt humors or frighten the soul during orgasm. The moon influenced fertility, with the full moon risking feverish births. Morning sex shocked the system. Afternoons were for work, and nights required completed digestion and a sin-free mind. Pragmatic physicians, often Arabic-influenced, focused on mitigating risks through rest and diet, but the culture of fear dominated, making every intimate act a gamble with survival. One medieval text even suggested that a well-timed romantic encounter could loosen phlegm and brighten the eyes, though only if done with restraint and mutual consent. But these moderate voices were often drowned out by louder, more fearful ones. The prevailing message was clear: desire must be regulated. Your body isn't just yours, it's on a divine lease. Use it wrong, and you might void the warranty. So, here you are, staring out the window as a crescent moon rises over the fields. You've fasted, bathed, said your prayers, and triple-checked the calendar. It's not a saint's day. The air is cool and dry, and Venus seems to be behaving herself. Maybe tonight's the night. Maybe you've passed all the checkpoints, avoided all the taboos. But then you remember it's Tuesday, and someone did die during a thunderstorm last week. You sigh, blow out the candle, and roll over chastely. Maybe next Thursday. At some point, you begin to suspect your body is a ticking hourglass. Every thought, breath, or drop of sweat might be chipping away at some internal reserve you didn't even know you had. Then you hear it again, maybe from a friend, a neighbor, or that wandering, toothless herbalist who charges by the curse. Men are born with a finite amount of seed. Once it's gone, you're done. Game over. No respawn. You don't just go sterile, you die. Welcome to the medieval panic over sperm scarcity. This wasn't some abstract myth. It was a deeply rooted belief tangled in medicine, theology, and patriarchal fear. Semen wasn't just something your body made regularly, like spit or sweat. It was your life force, a golden, warm distillation of blood, essence, and divine spark, slowly cooked in your testicles, considered small internal furnaces with limited fuel. Doctors, priests, and scholars believed you were born with a finite supply of this precious substance. Every release, especially through wasteful acts like masturbation or nocturnal emissions, meant losing a piece of yourself, literally. Your bones weakened, your eyesight dimmed, your memory slipped, and your years on earth ticked away like candle wax under a hot breeze. Some texts even quantified how often a man could afford to lose his seed. One physician suggested once a week was the upper limit for a healthy adult, twice if you were young, strong, and had just eaten a goose. More than that, and you were risking your future. A medical scroll from northern Italy warned that a man who spills himself more than thrice in 8 days might hear voices of the grave. Subtle. This created an existential math problem. Was that dream last night one of your 50 allotted emissions? Do you have 25 left? 10? What happens if you run out in your 30s? Will you collapse on the roadside, urinating rose water? Yes, oddly colored urine was a supposed symptom of overdrawn essence, alongside dizziness, chest pain, and eventual death. For monks who took vows of celibacy, this belief was both a badge of honor and a source of terror. Preserving their seed was like preserving their soul. A chaste body was a fortress, resilient and sacred. But an accidental emission could spell doom. Monks who experienced nocturnal emissions often responded with guilt, self-flagellation, or fasting, believing their reserves were unjustly depleted and unrecoverable. This fear crept into medicine, too. If a man was ill, doctors might ask, "Have you lately poured forth too much of yourself?" The answer could shift the diagnosis entirely. Fever and fatigue might not be bad air, but your loins turning against you. Preventative measures were both hilarious and disturbing. Diets were designed to cool the body and slow semen production. Lettuce, vinegar, barley water, and dried figs were recommended, while garlic, onions, and red meat were dangerously aphrodisiac. A man who ate too many eggs might boil over with excess seed, leading to its tragic escape. Some physicians suggested binding the thighs during sleep or wearing tight leather belts to prevent accidental emissions, not for fashion, but for health. One committed physician prescribed a paste of powdered lead and rose petals applied nightly for 3 weeks. Do not try that at home. Women were rarely the focus of this sperm-centric anxiety. Their pleasure was either minimized or blamed for triggering catastrophic losses. Some texts described female beauty as a thief of male vitality, capable of reducing a strong man to dust just by making him think about her too often. You could lose your life force from a long gaze at the wrong cheekbone. This idea of a fixed sperm quota shaped rules around marital intimacy, royal heirs, and even war planning. Soldiers were warned not to have sex before battle to preserve strength, alertness, and bravery. A warrior with spent seed was thought less likely to survive. The body wasn't a renewable system, but a candle, and sex was a gust of wind. Too much passion, and poof, there goes your soul. So you sit there, legs crossed protectively, wondering if that dream last week shaved a month off your life. You skip dinner, avoiding onions, wine, and goat stew, trying to stretch your vitality until next Thursday, maybe somewhere on the edge of your village, in a crooked hut smelling of damp herbs and wet straw, lives a woman who claims to know secrets. She's not a healer, but everyone calls her one. Whispers tell of her helping barren women, easing hard births, or making a soldier cry for 3 days with yarrow and a few quiet words. You go to her in secret. Nobody wants to be seen at her door. Tonight, your heart is tangled, your thoughts heavy, and you need something stronger than prayer. You walk the crooked path to her hut, the keeper of potions, promises, and dangerous knowledge. This is where medicine meets magic. When the church and doctors failed, judged too harshly, or refused to help, people turned to folk remedies from women who understood the body through experience, not scrolls. For sex, these women had answers priests wouldn't speak aloud. Love potions, lust charms, fertility brews, remedies for unwanted stirrings. These weren't fairy tales, but the underground medicine of the medieval world, blended from herbs, roots, minerals, and superstition, addressing needs sanctioned medicine often ignored, especially for women. Love potions were crafted to ignite passion or seduce a cold lover. Ingredients like damiana, mandrake, fennel, or animal parts, tongues, hearts, dried livers, were thought to transfer vigor. Sometimes menstrual or animal blood, even stolen communion wafers, were involved. A woman might steep rosemary and mugwort in wine to rekindle her husband's desire, or tuck vervain and dill into her corset to stir affection. Cooling potions, using bitter herbs like wormwood or valerian, were meant to quiet unwanted lust, especially in men fearing their dreams or women deemed too warm. But many ingredients were toxic. Mandrake could make you hallucinate or die. belladonna enhanced beauty but stopped your heart, and you increased arousal until it didn't. These healers walked a razor's edge, and the danger wasn't just chemical but political. The church viewed their practices with suspicion, especially when they worked. A woman helping another conceive without a priest's blessing was suspicious. A widow curing impotence with a poultice and chant, even more so. The line between medicine and witchcraft blurred. Early on, folk remedies were tolerated, even used by monks copying Arabic texts. But by the 13th century, the church cracked down on sorcery, manipulating love or lust. Women were punished, jailed, flogged, or executed for brewing herbal teas. In Bohemia, one was burned after a merchant claimed her charm made his wife irresistible. Another was drowned for an elixir causing unholy wantonness in a priest. Whether these remedies worked, the fear they provoked was real. A 14th-century guide advised husbands to inspect their wives' food for enchantment. Warning signs included clove-scented clothes, warm wine, sudden mood improvements, or glassy eyes of affection. Despite the risk, the trade continued because people needed ways to feel connected, conceive, or avoid conception. Scholars debate the potion's effectiveness. Some cite the placebo effect, others the pharmacological power of herbs. But the act of taking charge was powerful in a world where so much was out of control. Holding that pouch of herbs from the wise woman's calloused hand, you hold rebellion, a sip of choice in a world built on denial. Maybe you'll use it, maybe you won't. Maybe you'll just sleep better knowing you could. A bad smell follows you always. It's in the alleys, church pews, your neighbor's loft. The world smells of sweat, smoke, boiled onions, and something that might be cheese or decay. In medieval Europe, this is normal. But if you smell too much like sex, people worry. Scent wasn't just about cleanliness. It was about morality. Your body was a sponge for spiritual energies, and what you smelled like revealed what you were. Sex was believed to leave a sulfurous, sticky aura of sin, marking you as impure. You wake up stinking, not from lack of bathing, though you probably haven't, but from carnal acts, as the doctor puts it with a raised eyebrow and a sniff. This is diagnosis by nose. Texts claim the scent of lust rose from the pores after intimacy, especially if too vigorous or on the wrong lunar day, warm, damp, animal-like, even sulfurous or like roasted meat. Sex released heat and moisture tied to the humors, carrying the scent of internal decay. Your body wasn't just losing energy, it was rotting. For women, the stigma was worse. Their leakier, more porous bodies were prone to fluid excesses, especially during menstruation or sex. A woman smelling earthy or musky might be suspected of promiscuity or disease. One manual instructed confessors to judge a woman's sins by her breath and body odor. Heavy breath signaled unchaste acts. Menstrual blood was considered toxic waste, corrupting if mixed with semen, causing infertility, madness, or birth defects. Babies born red-eyed or sickly were blamed on this mix. To combat these smells, people used herbal sachets, lavender, rosemary, sage, or pungent rue and camphor, to mask odors and drive away sinful thoughts. Some tried fumigation, sitting over steaming herb pots to purify the lower body, especially for women with uterine disorders or excessive heat. Men who had too much sex developed a musk, sour sweat, burnt breath, thinning hair. Chewing fennel or rinsing with vinegar helped, but the real fix was abstinence. Some, called noses of God, claimed to smell sexual sin, like a Bavarian man detecting impure couples across crowded churches. Smell was a health gauge in a world without germ theory. Foul breath meant stomach trouble, body odor meant fever, and lust scent meant your soul was sweating corruption. You scrub your hands in rosemary water, sprinkle rose petals under your tunic, and hope the priest doesn't sniff too hard. You're walking past the blacksmith's workshop when you hear a clinking. Not horseshoes or hinges, but something delicate. Through the smoke-streaked window, you see him hammering iron into a rounded frame, fitting it to a mannequin. It's a chastity belt, or so it claims. These devices teeter between fact and fiction. The popular image of rusty iron underwear with a heart-shaped keyhole feels absurd, yet the idea lingers in museums labeled as 15th-century devices of virtue. Evidence suggests most surviving belts are Renaissance or later, likely curiosity items or dark jokes, not serious tools. The legend says noblemen used them to ensure their wives' purity during absences, but there's little proof they were widely used. Still, the idea tied to medical beliefs. Unchecked female desire could cause disease, infertility, or madness due to the wandering womb. Chastity devices, real or metaphorical, protected health and reputation, designed by men for men, ignoring the wearer's comfort. Some physicians advocated mechanical modesty, wrapping women in wool or linen or using garments tightening around the thighs. Religious women occasionally chose restrictive clothing as penance, like spiked girdles, to resist temptation. Darker stories whisper of women forced into these devices as punishment, wives, daughters, or servants, leading to infection, scarring, or despair. One 16th-century Venetian account mentions a girl dying after a year of confinement. Some belts had bells, engravings, or inscriptions like custody corpus tuum, guard your body. Scholars debate whether chastity belts were myths, metaphors, or rare punitive tools. They reflect the medieval obsession with controlling female sexuality. Men faced less dramatic devices, cold compresses or bindings to prevent emissions, but nothing matched the belt's horror. You stare into the fireplace, wondering who the belt is for and whether she'll scream or accept it quietly, like so many before her. You're in bed, joints creaking under scratchy wool, wondering what's happening inside your body. A mystery in medieval Europe. You're a leaky vessel, especially if you're a woman. Menstruation was seen as internal house cleaning. Excess blood purged monthly because women's colder, wetter bodies couldn't cook it into semen. Blocked menses were feared, potentially rotting and causing hysteria, blindness, or madness. Leeches under the arms or warm clove tea with jumping were prescribed. Menstrual blood was deemed toxic, souring wine, killing crops, or clouding mirrors. Sex during menstruation was catastrophic, producing wicked or malformed children. Childbirth was divine yet dangerous, handled by midwives, not physicians, who saw it as too messy. Some claimed its pain was punishment for Eve's sin. Women's moist nature made them sluggish, emotional, or infertile if too wet, or barren if too dry. Their bodies were full of openings, ears, nose, mouth, vagina, gateways for sin or illness. Tight clothing was prescribed for containment, not modesty. Women's sexual energy could emit vapors, seducing men without touch, so they were told to walk slowly and avoid loud laughter. Female semen retention was believed to cause fevers or spiritual exhaustion if not released properly. Midwives offered practical remedies, balms, teas, stones for labor, but their knowledge, passed orally, rarely reached books. You lie awake, wondering if your rumbling belly signals shifting humors or indigestion. You wrap your shawl tighter, praying to keep your organs in place for another night. In a stone library, lit by a flickering candle, you squint at a Latin treatise by Brother Henricus, a celibate monk confident about sex, positions, fluids, emotions, and how to tell if someone's doing it wrong. Monks wrote sex manuals, despite their vows, because monasteries were hubs of scholarship. Medicine, astronomy, theology, and sexuality were studied, as physical and spiritual health were inseparable. These texts mixed curiosity, anxiety, and imagination, offering medical advice like avoiding salted meats for unwanted stiffness or spiritual checklists for confessors to probe penitents' sins in exhaustive detail. Medieval confession manuals were meticulous, categorizing sexual sins with precision. Relations on feast days, impure thoughts, or marital acts not aimed at procreation were all scrutinized. Guides divided sex into types: bestial, unnatural, idle, or acceptable within marital duty, defining a narrow path to righteous intimacy, with deviations risking damnation or madness. Ironically, celibate monks, with no first-hand experience, crafted elaborate theories about sex. They favored the missionary position as humble and natural, condemning others as disorderly or demonic, potentially causing deformed offspring. Their writings, blending fear and fascination, described orgasm as a shudder of the spine and a loss of vital spirit, leaving the body slack as a deflated wineskin. These monks preserved ancient texts by Galen, Hippocrates, and Arabic scholars like Avicenna, which offered franker views on sexuality, including the Trochula's remedies for female pleasure and conception. Yet, they always framed sex as dangerous, requiring prayer and confinement within marriage. Historians debate whether these texts were theoretical or reflected genuine fear of temptation. Regardless, they shaped a world where intimacy was dictated by those least experienced in it. Astrology further complicated matters, with stars dictating sexual timing. Zodiac signs influenced bodily fluids and desires. Aries too hot, Scorpio dangerous, Libra cautious. The moon's phases govern blood, mood, and wombs. Full moons risked excessive passion. Dark moons drained energy. Physicians consulted celestial charts, timing intimacy to avoid afflicted zodiac regions, like Virgo ruling the abdomen. Astrological guides warned against sex under certain planetary alignments, lest children be born wild or deceitful. Defying the stars was seen as defying divine order, carrying spiritual consequences. For warriors, sex was a tactical liability. Medieval belief held that intercourse drained strength, dulled reflexes, and weakened courage, disrupting the four humors. Knights were advised to abstain before battles, with manuals urging squires to avoid women for days to ensure a true sword. Commanders enforced chastity, sometimes with crude inspections, fearing spiritual corruption or death in combat. Some knights wore talismans to guard the seed, while erotic dreams were bad omens. Despite this, mercenaries often defied rules, seeking brothels before battles, though a poor performance was blamed on women's bewitching influence. The fear of succubi and incubi was vivid. These demons seduced sleepers, draining life through intercourse. Succubi targeted men, incubi women, with repeated visits causing illness or death. Theologians like Augustine and Aquinas debated their reality, suggesting demons could transfer semen to create half-demonic offspring. Victims faced exorcisms, penance, or isolation, with protective measures like crucifixes or consecrated salt. Some whispered of witches inviting these demons for knowledge or pleasure, though such tales were scandalous. Celibacy was hailed as a path to longevity, preserving vital essence. Virgin men were praised for stamina and clarity, while virgin women were seen as spiritually protected, free from wandering wombs or hot blood. Virginity was depicted as a health plan, with chaste saints glowing in art. Some swore off sex for preservation, not piety, though skeptics noted robust grandparents outliving celibate monks. A legendary man abstained from all touch to live to 65, only to be mocked as already dead. Sexual issues were rarely addressed openly. Physicians served elites, leaving the poor to midwives or silence. Men with dysfunction faced cooling foods or bizarre remedies like clay pots tied to thighs, while psychological issues were dismissed as demonic. Women's complaints, like unexplained pleasure, were labeled hysteria, treated with herbal sedatives or fumigation. The Church's confessional focus on judgment stifled honest discussion, leaving people to suffer in silence. Public shaming was a spectacle for sexual sins. Adulterous women faced flogging, exile, or parading through town, while men often escaped with fines. Prostitutes wore distinctive clothing and faced harsh penalties for stepping out of bounds. Homosexuality was severely punished, with men facing castration or burning, and women mocked publicly. Punishments like crawling through squares or wearing iron tongues reinforced shame as control. Wealthy sinners could buy leniency, but the poor bore lasting stigma. Reproductive care relied on midwives, not scholars. Official medicine misunderstood pregnancy, tying conception to mutual orgasm, sometimes used to dismiss rape victims. Midwives used herbs like pennyroyal or rue for early-stage cleansing, though risky and condemned by the church. Contraception, like animal intestine condoms or amulets, was secretive. Infertility was blamed on women, with remedies ranging from full moon sex to stag antler wine. Midwives, vital yet vulnerable, faced execution if accused of witchcraft. When plagues struck, like the Black Death, sexual immorality was blamed. Brothels and loose women were scapegoated, with sermons urging chastity as a cure. Flagellants whipped themselves to purge lust, and affection was condemned. Yet, in death's shadow, furtive passion persisted. Trysts in graveyards, stolen kisses. Some fringe doctors saw sex as a humoral purge, but most deemed it a risk, with women accused of sexual sins facing banishment or execution. In this world, desire was a battlefield of fear, shame, and defiance. Midwives, soldiers, and silent lovers navigated a system that judged bodies harshly, yet humanity persisted. Whispered advice, hidden herbs, stolen moments. The body remained alive, hungry, and defiant, despite centuries of rules.